Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brad Kelso and Steve Kerler, co-founders and managing partners at Privageo, which is a firm dedicated to privacy issues, and also founders of the PrivacyOC community, which is a LinkedIn group that provides information and a great annual conference for people that are interested in privacy issues. And with that, I will turn things over to Brad and Steve.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate it. Dan and Alan, thank you for inviting us. There we go. Let me share. There's Brad and Steve.
And here I am. Hello. Greetings, everyone.
Thank you for having us. We're delighted to be here tonight and hopefully presenting a slightly different perspective on privacy. We know you've heard a little bit about privacy, and of course you are a technical group. So we kind of catered what we're going to be talking about to that, and we really appreciate, whoopsie daisy, back we go. So why your privacy matters. My name is Brad Kelso, and my business partner, Steve Kerler, is on as well. We'll be co-presenting tonight. And we are Privageo. Privageo is about 2.5 years old. We are a data privacy and security solutions company. We help companies navigate the privacy waters. And we are a little bit different in that we execute very meaningful solutions for our clients. This is not stuff that sits on the shelf. We ourselves are from the C-suite, and so we deliver kind of a strategic and tactical approach together. And around the beginning of last year, we also founded a group called PrivacyOC. I should say it's 1.5 years. Now it has about 600 members, and we encourage you, if you're interested, it has a number of professionals in it, and it's really just a nonprofit intended to create good networking, good sharing of business practices around privacy, and many security folks are there as well as legal folks. We have a packed agenda tonight. We are going to be talking about what data privacy means to a little different bent than maybe you're used to. The things specifically about your world and your children's world that are relevant to what's going on right today. In fact, this moves quite rapidly. Last 3 months, we've seen significant changes. If you follow the news, we have new laws constantly. We're going to discuss the latest issues in privacy and security, to some degree, some of the new technologies, the data uses and their impact. We're going to touch on legal protections. We are not going to drone on about legal protections, just give you a quick highlight of what's going on with CPRA. And lastly, we're going to touch on some business models that are coming up into the landscape of privacy, and a little bit about the responses of consumers and businesses. So with that as a preface, let's start with what privacy means to you. And I'm going to temporarily turn off my share to also share a video. So here we go. Steve,
okay, great, Brad. I'm going to share this here, and let's see if we can see this. And is everybody able to see and hear that?
Yep.
Perfect. What are you doing? Okay, Brad, I'll let you share again.
Right. So
you're all probably sitting there wondering, I thought this was going to be a technical discussion and we're talking about privacy, and what the heck am I watching this for, right? And so we're going to give you a little journey, and I'm going to ask you just to be patient with us as we go through this, because what privacy means to each of us is actually very different.
Hey, Steve, can you unshare so I can get back on the...
Oh, I'm sorry, sure.
Thank you.
There you go, Brad.
Thank you.
Okay. You'll have to remind me throughout the evening to do this.
Yeah,
I'm sure I'll forget. So what does privacy really mean to you? So as you saw from that video, how many of you have not, bebopped in the kitchen or done something really fun, and all of a sudden you get walked in on and you're surprised, right? You thought you were in a private moment, enjoying yourself, and all of a sudden it's over because you realize that somebody or some people are watching. So what happens is when we lose our privacy, we actually change our behavior. And really, that's a big impact, right? Because it's really privacy is something that's very innately a part of us. We wind up when we lose our privacy with shame or embarrassment, and we change our behaviors along the way. And really, when you kind of turn it around, freedom, privacy really is all about freedom. It's the freedom to express yourself, as you can see in the video. It's the freedom to associate with people that you'd like to, the churches you'd like to go to, political groups, schools you go to, whatever it may be. And it's the freedom to basically assemble and to just, enjoy life, right? And when that is taken away, you kind of start taking away a fundamental right and some of the freedom that people enjoy. Now, you may wonder, okay, Steve, so what does this matter? Well, this is really not an old concept, right? If you go back to the 18th century, there was a philosopher named Jeremy Bentham. And Jeremy Bentham had this concept, if you will, of what was called a panopticon. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this, but what he did is he designed some architecture that basically had in the middle of this round building a tower where you could put prison guards, nurses, school teachers or principals, whatever. And that panopticon allowed you to simultaneously look into the various rooms or cells within the building, right? Very cool. You could do that with less staff. And what you could also do is stop any horseplay or breaking of rules. And it was very effective, right? So imagine that you're sitting in this, in a prison, let's say, or in a school or hospital, and you've got somebody watching up in the tower. And rather than just being free and goofing off, all of a sudden you're thinking, oh my God, maybe the principal's watching me. Maybe I better change my behavior, right? Back to that point again about when you're being observed, behavior gets stopped and you become controlled. In fact, this got so sophisticated that you really weren't even sure if somebody was in that guard window or not. They might be, or it might be completely unmanned. But it was a very, very effective way of controlling populations of people. And in fact, rooms of these types of buildings can still be seen around the world. In fact, even in the US, there are some cities that still have rooms that are similar to this, right? So Brad, if you go back up to the previous slide about freedom, the point of this is that over time, even if you go back to some totalitarian regimes, you see that the way that they controlled populations was by knowing everything about their population. I can share with you that happened happening in North Korea. It happened certainly in Stalin's Russia. It certainly happened in Nazi Germany. I can share with you that I know from relatives of mine who lived in that era in Europe that the government and the regime knew where you went to school, where you worked, how much you made, when you got fired, who you associated with. And by the way, it got to the point where you even had neighbors telling on each other because of who you associated with. I used to give this talk in person, and I can't tell you, there have been a number of times when people in tears have come up to me and said, I've lived that, and thank God I'm in a free country now. And it really kind of spoke to me in terms of where this comes. So when you start looking at freedom and privacy, it makes a big difference. Now, that was the way oppressive regimes used to do things a while back. And you say, well, that's ancient history, Steve, right? Well, there's some lessons from that. First of all, let's go back to when COVID first started. If you all recall the professor in China, the doctor in China who first uncovered the virus and started speaking to some of his medical school friends about it. Remember, he was reprimanded by the government for speaking about it. And 2 weeks later, he passed away, right? Now, they say he died of COVID. Did he? I don't know. It's anybody's guess, right? It's mysterious. But again, it's a way of controlling news and controlling populations. So it's not something that's just ancient. It's still ingrained in many parts of the world. In fact, it explains why the general data protection requirements in Europe, regulations in Europe, GDPR came about. Because if you look at Europe and the data privacy laws that were passed there, culturally, because of the experiences of the World War II era, data privacy is a right that is written into the Constitution in Europe. And it is very much revered because people in recent history, grandparents, remember this kind of a social structure. So the laws over there tend to be very strict, particularly in Germany, by the way. It is known as the country that is the strictest in implementing and enforcing GDPR laws, okay? So that's a little bit of the background and history of why this is relevant and where it comes from and why privacy is not just something light, it's pretty heavy. Second piece here I want to talk about is privacy is a human right. And this is allowed, many of the constitutions of the world have this written in it as well. A just fundamental belief that privacy is a human right. And you'll see actually even today's tech leaders speaking about privacy as a human right. And we'll talk more about that later. So a lot of people say, you know what? I have nothing to hide. I'm a good citizen. What's the difference? Let everybody tell, who cares? And I would contest that every one of us, if we're really honest, have something we're willing to hide, something that you'd prefer not to get out. And in fact, if any of you don't think so, I'm going to challenge you to give me all of your email addresses and all of your passwords to every account you have so that I can peruse them and publish them on the web and see what you think, okay? And bottom line is, I bet you very few of you would step up and do that. Brad, next slide. Privacy is also a personal choice. All of us have different reactions to privacy. Brad, for example, happens to sing. He sings publicly. He's part of a singing group, and he enjoys being out there and singing. I've seen him perform. He's awesome, okay? But there are many of us who wouldn't be caught dead singing in the shower, right? There are some people who are quite happy, dancing in public, and others that say, I don't want to dance, I'm going to hide in a corner, right? It's a personal choice in terms of what you want to do. And very much in that light, this right is written now into our laws, where we're trying to give that personal right back to individuals so that you can choose what data is out there about you and what is known about you and give you some control over that. Because that train's kind of left the station. And these laws are now trying to embody that back into where things are coming from, right? So when people say, forget privacy, it doesn't really matter, I just like you to keep some of these principles in mind because they really do drive a lot of not only how we behave and what kind of a freedom we enjoy and the choices we enjoy, but also are embodied in the thinking behind many of these laws that we'll talk about that are evolving around the world. Brad, do you want to talk a little about the impact on kids?
So we've already, Steve brings up a really good point. I don't know if you remember the time you traded basically to get a free email address. Many years ago, we all paid for email address, 10, 15, 20 bucks a month. Came with the ISP, we were even paying AOL. But back in the day, I made a trade with Gmail that I didn't think or Google that was any big deal. I had no idea that my trade was going to end up benefiting them to the tune of 5,000 bucks a year. I wouldn't change that trade today yet, but I think we are subconsciously now aware and maybe consciously more aware. Here's the problem. There's a whole generation, millennials, X gens, Y gens, do your gens, that may or may not be fully aware of the trade they made. Technical adoption to millennials, as we all know, if you have children, Steve and I have, I've got 4, Steve's got 3, and they're all about this age. They've been doing social media, photos, text, shopping, communications, gaming, memes, food delivery for crime and Italy's sake, collaborating with their friends, home education, everything. What they don't know, though, is they, in this process, have created a digital identity different than their own personal identity in the real world. And this footprint today is still fairly innocuous. It's used on a limited basis to manage that digital and virtual interaction with their people. And of course, AI is having a significant statement about that. But if you project this over the next 10 years, those digital identifications, if you think about what is going to be driving the IoT controls, or say autonomous vehicles and how that would be impacting your life, those digital IDs are more than just digital. They become your actual ID, how you will option in, how you will get certain offers and not other offers. You'll be discriminated. That's just the reality where we already are, and that maturity will have direct influence in the real world. So that's why today's discussion of privacy is so important. Whether you have control today or not, it's something that is endemic to where we're headed as a culture, as a society. And if you think about it, it's almost kind of worse the younger you get. think about the teens right now. They are way too comfortable sharing data because they've never known a world otherwise. At least my children, they only started texting, I think, in late junior high, early high school. But the downside to these teens is pretty evident. They are inundated with media. They get almost all their media out of their hand. They have depression, addiction, anxiety, bullying, significant feelings of inadequacy, and unfortunately, even suicide. So pretty severe impacts. And much of this is based on a sharing of data where they really are not in control. There's longer term damage here. So it's incumbent on us, and this is really a great article by Ari Lighthouse at Carnegie Mellon, this discussion of we owe a responsibility, even though we may ourselves be Luddites, and I'm talking to the wrong group here, right? You guys are, guys and gals are very much the technological edge. But there are a lot of people out there not fully utilizing technology. They probably don't realize how much of their data is out there. Even as I sign up for white papers, I contribute some information that's pretty innocuous. But in the long term, it kind of isn't. And so that's what we're talking about. And in our next section, let's talk about a little bit about the latest issues in data privacy and security. And this is kind of hot off the press. And we'll start it off, Steve, with, hey, your data is being borrowed. And I think we have another video to show. Is this right? Yeah. So hang on, let me unshare. I'm sorry, this is a
the question is, or is it, right? So let me start sharing here. And let's have a little fun with this.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for calling Hot and Fast Pizzas. Can I
I
have
want to order a pizza.
Surely, sir. Can I have your multi-purpose identification number?
One sec. It's RSP 06031983MI.
Thank you for the number, sir. Am I speaking with Mr. Rajneesh Haspuri from Baikala, Mumbai?
Yes.
The number from which you're calling is 9191930484 and your residential number is 22223244.
Yes. But how do you know all this?
We are connected to the system, sir. We have all the related information.
Good. I want to order a regular size seafood pizza.
Sure, sir. But that's not a good idea.
What do you mean?
As per your last medical records at Bombay Hospital, dated 9th August 2015, you have high blood pressure and a high cholesterol level, sir.
What are you saying?
As I said, we are connected to the system, sir.
Oh shit. Okay. Then what would you recommend?
Try a low-fat super vegetarian Mexican pizza. You will like it.
And how can you say that?
As you borrowed a book titled Popular Mexican Food from National Library last month, which is overdue to be returned, sir.
Okay, I give up. See, I'm very hungry. Send me one of those. How much would it cost?
The total cost is rupees 365, including taxes, sir.
Okay, fine. You send the pizza. I'll pay for it by my credit card. Okay?
I'm afraid you have to pay us by cash, sir. Your only active credit card of Apex Bank is over the limit, and amount due is rupees 79,765 since July 2015. That's not including the late payment charges on your last cash withdrawal.
That's fine. You send the pizza.
Good evening, sir.
I guess I will have to go to the ATM in the next lane.
Sorry to inform, but you can't, sir. You have reached your daily cash limits, which was withdrawn at an ATM at Domestic Airport Terminal B when your wife took a flight to New Delhi today.
Damn it. How do you know?
As I said, we are connected.
Yes, you're connected to the system.
Yes.
You send the pizza. I'll pay by cash. How long would it take?
25 minutes, sir. But if you can't wait, as you said earlier, that you're very hungry, you can always come to a nearest outlet.
What?
As you're just 4 minutes away from a nearest outlet in your area, and you have a car of number MS01XC3484, your Kazi brand.
Oh God. How the hell you
As
know?
I said to you earlier, we are connected to the system, sir.
What the? I just want my pizza.
Okay, your order is confirmed, sir. Anything else, sir?
Nothing. Would I be getting the 3 bottles of cola mentioned in your menu?
We normally would, sir. But based on your medical records, you're also a diabetic and
Enough. Send the cola along, you bitch.
I request you, please do not use such language, sir. You were convicted on 13th March 2015 for using abusive language to a policeman.
What?
And you were also arrested for misbehaving with a lady in a party.
Shut up. Just shut up, you bitch.
Unshare, Steve.
Hello.
Good evening, sir. Am I speaking with Mr. Rajneesh S. Puri?
Yes.
Sir, we have a complete anger management program which can treat your aggressive behavior.
What? Who told you that?
It's in our system, sir.
To hell with your system. Fuck your system.
Over to you, Brad.
Thank you.
So I hope that this evening you all appreciate a little bit of comedic levity, and I hope nobody's ordering a pizza tonight. It's a bit of a far-fetched story, but really when you look at what's happening out there and what's capturing your data, it really is amazing. I recently had an experience where I decided to cut the cord with my cable company on TV and just go to some streaming products, for example. And so I looked at Roku and Shield and Apple TV and Chromecast, and I'll tell you, it's almost impossible to stop the sharing of my data. Even difficult to find the settings to turn off the microphone that's recording my voice while I'm sitting on the couch with my wife. You look at applications all around us. How many people have gone to 23andMe or Ancestry or MyHeritage and said, you know what, I'd like to know my DNA, right? But did you know that all those services have arrangements with the police department and with third-party commercial vendors, unbeknownst to you and undisclosed, where that information is being shared? Sometimes for good reason, but sometimes for reason that you have no awareness of. Did you know that recently I went to a local shop here to go get some dinner? And as I walked out and got in my car, I checked my phone and I found a coupon for having shopped there. I never gave them my phone number. All I gave them was a form of payment. And by the way, when I got home, the next couple hours later, I got a survey in the mail that said, how was your dinner? And a week later, I got a coupon that says, please come again. Right? I never asked for any of those things. NFC was turned off on my phone. I probably had Wi-Fi on, but these are the kinds of ways that things are being infiltrated into our environment, right? So your privacy really is an issue. Look at Fitbit. If you got a Fitbit tracker, it knows everything about you, right? And by the way, just when you thought everything was good, it was sold to Google, right? And what does Google do? Well, they make a heck of a lot of money knowing about you. So this is really being taken from you all over the place, and that is really one of the bigger, concerns we need to be aware of. So, Brad, why don't we go to the next slide, and let's talk a little bit about how this data is being used, right? So we know it's being collected. So now what's happening with it? So let's take this journey a bit, and let's start broadly in our neighborhood, okay? And again, I'm not making value judgments here on anything. Just in these are news headlines that are fairly recent. Did you know that fairly recently, the city of Stanton decided to implement and purchase license plate scanning software, right? Now, why? Because there's a lot of stolen cars that wind up in the neighborhood and they want to track down the thieves, right? All good stuff, right? In fact, Lake Forest is doing the same thing. See the headline there? And in fact, Lake Forest had a public meeting about the use of license plate scanning, drones, and helicopters in the neighborhoods, right? All of this sounds pretty innocent. But in some parts of the country, those same vehicles that are scanning for license plates are also scanning faces to look for criminals, anybody who may have crossed the border illegally. So this information is really, really becoming used in ways that we aren't even aware of, right? How many times I've heard several stories of people who've had a drone flying in their backyard while their kids were outside sunbathing, right? Who allowed that drone to come there? It might have been purely for police reasons, maybe for realtor reasons to list the property, but where does this end? And where does your privacy end, right? Very, very interesting things. So while technology can do great things, we need to be very careful about how does that start affecting our privacy? Back to the principles I talked about earlier. All right, that's your neighborhood. Let's talk about your home. How many of you have Ring doorbells? And I'm sure you've read the stories, right? There was a person who put a Ring device with a camera in their child's bedroom. A hacker got in and started doing some really creepy things like speaking over the speaker to their children while they were out of the house, asking where mommy and daddy were, right? And by the way, those same Ring devices that you innocently put on your front door to see who's standing there, Amazon, for example, has a known partnership relationship with law enforcement, right? Again, it all sounds great. Let's catch the criminals. But what are the unintended consequences of that on you and on your privacy, right? It starts getting into, for example, LAPD requested footage of Black Lives Matter protesters on the street. What did that have to do with me buying my Ring doorbell, right? There was somebody who caught her boyfriend cheating because of a Ring doorbell stream that was left online, right? So all unintended consequences to what could be really helpful and good technology we need to be aware of. So let's take it a level further, Brad. What about your face? Facial images are being scanned regularly, and there's one particular company called Clearview AI that uses AI to do this. Clearview AI is probably the biggest user of scanned images in the country right now. They have over 3 billion images in their database, okay? What they do is they scrape LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it, any of the social media sites for photos, and then they sell that data to law enforcement. And law enforcement then uses that to cross-reference and find criminals or find perpetrators or suspects or whatever else, right? And this starts becoming really, really pervasive, right? So you say, okay, well, great, it's good for law enforcement, that's okay, it's fine, right? But I never intended my picture to be used that way. Okay, let's go to the next step. Clearview happened to have been hacked shortly after this became major news, and because it wasn't disclosed and they were in big trouble, somebody hacked all of the images over at Clearview and got a hold of them, made them public, right? And in the course of that disclosure, we find out that not only did Clearview share this information with law enforcement for good purposes, they also sold images to Macy's, to Best Buy, and to shopping malls. And why did they do that? Because those retail outlets can now track your face, understand from profiling, which we'll get into, what kind of buying and behaviors you have, what your personality is, what your mood is of the day, et cetera, where you've been, where you're going, what your shopping track patterns are, your heat maps for walking around, and then use that information to guide you to stores and to sales and to certain shelves and displays and departments based upon those preferences, right? All from putting a photo up on a LinkedIn profile.
By the way, it doesn't have to be Clearview. A simple photo of a teen several teens was recently hacked by a mother in Pennsylvania who had a cheerleader who was competing with those other cheerleaders. And so she put those images stolen from social media onto deepfake videos, republished them to the coach, and basically created her own scandal with a very simple using of the available social media pictures. So it doesn't have to be a Clearview AI. Your picture is meaningful, not just in AI, but just in the use of it alone.
Absolutely. So while Canada was able to use the tool to find 15 child exploitation cases and help rescue some kids, right? We've got some real good stuff that comes out of this, but we've got to watch out on what happens on the bad side, as Brad just said.
What's beyond faces, though?
So the next question is, let's go a little further and let's look at your personality profiles a little bit here. And probably the biggest, most famous case around this you've all heard of is the Facebook Cambridge Analytica case. And I'm going to again share a brief video with you. And this is a trailer to a movie called The Great Hack. And if you're bored at home and you want to watch a movie and you want to watch something pretty interesting, it's Hollywoodized, granted, but it's very interesting about what it is. So let me play that trailer real quick, Brad, if I could tab the screen.
You got the con. Apologies for some people that are seeing this a little pixelated. He's flowing it as quickly as he can through his pipe.
Who has seen an advertisement that has convinced you that your microphone is listening to your conversations? All of your interactions, your credit card swipes, web searches, locations, likes, they're all collected in real time into $1 trillion a year industry.
The real game changer was Cambridge Analytica. They worked for the Trump campaign and for the Brexit campaign. They started using information warfare.
Cambridge Analytica claimed to have 5,000 data points on every American voter.
I started tracking down all these Cambridge Analytica ex-employees.
Someone else that you should be calling to committee is Brittany Kaiser.
Brittany Kaiser, once a key player inside Cambridge Analytica, casting herself as a whistleblower.
The reason why Google, Facebook are the most powerful companies in the world is because last year data surpassed oil in value. Data is the most valuable asset on Earth. We targeted those whose minds we thought we could change until they saw the world the way we wanted them to. I do know that their targeting tool was considered a weapon.
There is a possibility that the American public have been experimented on. This is becoming a criminal matter. When people see the extent of the surveillance, I think they're going to be shocked.
And I still fear for your life. Yeah, like the powerful people that are involved. But I can't keep quiet just because it'll make powerful people mad. States' rights should be considered just fundamental rights.
This is about the integrity of our democracy. These platforms which were created to connect us have now been weaponized. It's impossible to know what is what, because nothing is what it seems.
Brad, back to you. If you can share. So let's take this case a little bit and let's break it apart. This is clearly a use of artificial intelligence. And what they did at Cambridge Analytica is they took 87 million Facebook users. And they had about 5,000 data points for those users, right? Let me stop the share here. Sorry, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you.
There we go. And they basically sent out a quiz. And the quiz was really a quiz that was going to help them to profile people based upon 5 principles of what they call the ocean model. And the ocean model is really a psychological analysis model. It looks at what your emotional state is, your openness to ideas, your conscientiousness, and some other factors. And it starts to profile you psychologically in terms of where you fit, right? And it adds some other things into the model as well, so that you can kind of get a profile of where you are. So all of us really have a profile around us. It talks to us about how prone are you to worry, how outgoing are you introverted or not, et cetera, right? And based on this profile, you're now able to take this data, target it to the undecided voters in the key states that matter, and start targeting ads for them, right? And an example of one of those ads is on the bottom there. This happened to be a pro-marriage ad. And they looked for people that had a high conscientiousness score on that ocean scale. And they sent them, and people that are very conscientious tend to be people that like a sense of order and structure. And so the ad says, look up marriage and get back to me, with a picture of a dictionary and a Bible, right? Very appealing to somebody who likes a sense of order. If people had a low conscientiousness score, they got a different ad that appealed to that particular profile mix. And this is how influencers happened. I had some personal experience with some of this because I did a lot of work in the organizational change management field, implementing large software applications, multi-million-dollar, big kind of deals, SAP, that sort of stuff. And I met a firm in Australia that was doing this to help us with getting change management, or getting companies and employees to adopt to change. A very interesting model, used the same kinds of features as this is, a little different application. But in my course of conversations, and this is back in about 2010 or so, it's quite a while back, they were saying that they were using this for various political organizations across the globe, and for organizations that had an interest in making social change. And they were getting paid to do this for exactly this reason, targeting and then changing messages. So if you get a chance, watch this movie. By the way, it focuses on the Trump campaign of 2016. This is not a political message. And by the way, my point is, this has happened on lots of other campaigns, just happens to be the one that got the big highlight. So I'm not providing any political opinions here, just that the data you've provided is being used for purposes for which you probably never intended. Right? Brad, do you want to move on?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Okay.
There we go. So now who are you? We talked a lot about this digital identification. And of course, we've had scores about ourselves for an awful long time. The old you, we've always had a Fair Isaac score. That's our credit score. I don't know if you know this. There are really only two consumer scores that you can get your hands on when you're working with credit scores. The real credit scores, there's 15 of them. I happen to work in the credit industry for 15 years developing product. The 15 credit scores you don't see are the ones that drive your world. They're the ones that cause your mortgage to cost $2,000 more or worse than that. They can now guess your income within 15% accuracy without income data. There are psychographics, of course, about you, the propensity for you to buy. Experian has identified 66 lifestyles that you're not associated with. Of course, the really old ones, the rank order ones, like your GPA or your SAT scores, your class rank, your DMV driving record, your Better Business Bureau ranking, those are all old and kind of antiquated, actually. In fact, they're even being set to the side. But remember the Chinese? Yeah, they've got a social credit score. And look at over to the left here. It has a reward and punishment element to it. You actually you earn your way up and down into the Chinese opportunities by having a higher score. But I think there's a new you in the game. Here are a list of 6 examples that are really going into subjective worlds. SIFT, for example, takes I believe it's 16,000 potential variables, puts them into a 400 attribute model as trying to answer one question. Can you be trusted to not ruin my Airbnb? That's what they started with, that premise. OkCupid also wants to know that answer. Zeta, do you have disposable money to spend? BMW wants to know that. The retailer equation, separate group that's trying to identify from Nordstrom's whether that dress that my wife purchased, is it going to be returned the next day? Is that your profile? My Life is all about personal reputation. They take all kinds of data and try to basically score whether you're honest and reputable. Ocean, Steve mentioned, that is that star graphic. How persuadable are you? It's been used going all the way back even before the 2016. And it's a very old model on personality. Or Riskified, how crooked are you? Not just in fraud. So you combine all these things, and now who you are is some variation on these synthetic descriptions, subjective descriptions that may or may not be accurate. So kind of an interesting take. We started at neighborhood, we went to your house, we went to your face, we went to your personality, and now you're almost a virtual you. But that's just a part of the problem. The other part is your data's been stolen. So, we have been dealing with almost 3 to 4 years of significant security issues, propelling quite an industry here. I just thought I'd share with you what that's looking like in the dark web. And many of you are familiar with this, and I just took a smattering of what is available about you on the dark web, and it's very, very true. You are for sale, or at least your data is for sale. And this is a highly varied market. Ethereum, Bitcoin has made this a very efficient market. Once upon a time, your social security number was worth about $50. And a most recent, I think it's right here, your most recent US valid social security number is worth only $2. It's almost commoditized. On the other hand, an eBay account with a good reputation is worth up to $1,000. Access to your bank account depends on the amount of money and on average in your bank account. Check out the stolen online bank account logins, $40, as opposed to the one with a minimum 2,000 on that account. It's 3 times as valuable. So it's pretty scary stuff. And of course, every one of these intrusions and ransomware isn't just about garnering the ransom behind that, but also exfiltrating the data so that they can resell it. And you're very much for sale. We recently, one of our partners dealt with the city of Orange, and the city of Orange had found that they had 21% of their credentials to key systems that were already compromised in the dark web, freely available. You could shut down the water system, all those things. So a little scary, but pretty relevant here. And of course, for most of you, you're very, very aware that 2020 was not just the year of COVID. 2020 was the year of ransom. And here, the most recent one being SolarWinds, of course, but these are from some fairly significant ransomware payouts. Ransomware attacks actually increased to the tune of about 700% from the nadir, after the WannaCry peak in 2018, first quarter, all the way up to present. And there's a couple of important reasons for that. Most importantly is that insurance is paying out. There's an estimate last year, the insurance industry paid an estimation of about 20 billion in ransomware ransoms. And those ransomware hacks are increasingly patient. They have always been patient. They get in your system, they sit there for months, but that is only increasing. And why? Because they're looking for the most valuable data. They're looking for the most corruptible systems, and it's taking 7 to 9 months. They are also smarter. They're coming back. They're corrupting your backups. So if you think that you can restore from your backups, they're smart enough to already be corrupting that, or certainly being able to do something after they announce the ransomware. Of course, they're exfiltrating data. This idea that you're aware of the ransom and then you have a certain amount of dwell time where you haven't shut down your system, and then you're exposed. And worse of all, because they've been in your system for 7 to 9 months, that ransom might happen again because they've already known the side doors where they can come back in. So it's a pretty significant risk. It's part of the privacy equation. Later, we'll talk a little bit about frameworks, but privacy has its own protection sort of practice. And of course, security is part of that. That access is much a part of that. Disposal of data is part of that. Retention. It's a much broader discussion. And so we had to mention it as part of the probably most recent and most damaging. This information is actually kind of interesting, and I'll touch on it. Most of you are aware of this, but ransomware accounted for 31% of the total claims. But look at the next two most important, well, nearly the next two. Business email compromises, no surprise there, and 15% in staff error. So between those two, another 31% was really defensible. In other words, if we had any kind of email scanners or phishing ability, we could have prevented that. And if we're training our employees continuously, but guess what? We're not. So this kind of an interesting pie chart of this loss, that $20 billion in loss, brought to you by the Net Diligence Cyber Claims Study. And just going to go through the loss tactics. I mentioned the backups because they're going at your backups. That segregated and encrypted offline backup is now the #1 problem because you can't restore if it's already corrupted. 50% of companies still don't have a cyber incidents response plan, and on it goes. So I just wanted to take a time out and talk about that as a separate sort of technological problem within privacy, very much relevant to us all because it's the loss of data, it's the corruption of data, and it's a nefarious actor that's not going away. In fact, unfortunately, it seems to be growing leaps and bounds. So we'll take a time out. Steve, why don't you walk through what's going on, a quick legal protection discussion, because it's unfortunately relevant. I know you've been through this a little bit, but there's some recent updates that's important for us to review.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And Brad, who would have thought that you getting that free Google email address years ago would have led to all of this, right? It's just amazing when you really think about what's out there and what's happened. And so what do you do, right? So we're seeing a lot of legal responses right now, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on the law, but I think it's important at a high level to understand what we've got. First of all, in the US, on a privacy side, we're really governed by two types of laws. One are laws that are by sector. You've all heard of HIPAA for healthcare, Gramm-Leach-Bliley for financial services, on and on. That's been around for a while. But now with the passing of the GDPR in Europe and California adopting the California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA, and now the CPRA, which I'll talk about, we kind of led the United States in passing state laws for data privacy that go well beyond these sector laws we've had. California led the charge, but the point of this map here is look at all of the other states that are in motion. This is coming, right? It was coming a while back. It stopped because of COVID, but it's back in motion again. And this map is actually as of March 8th, right? Brad, if you can go up back, please. And if you look at the right side of the chart, you can see that there are, in addition to US being a really US patchwork of laws, but if you look at the right side, it's really also about the global laws that are being passed. So Brazil just passed a law, Canada strengthened its law, South Africa came online, Europe's online, and there are more and more. So the question really becomes, how do you navigate all of this? This is rapidly in motion, right? So now let's focus on California on the next slide. And I don't expect to go through all these data points, but if you look at all of that change, those blue and green marks you see are all of the changes that have happened to CCPA and CPRA in California since the beginning of 2018. So we are not only seeing these changes rapidly, even within California, we're seeing regulations and refinements happening on a very regular basis. So this is a very messy space at the moment here, and it's almost impossible to keep on top of, even when you're in the field.
Well, and you can imagine new laws in other countries are going through the same sort of iterative process, right? We went through 5 different revisions, clarifying. GDPR went through 3, but in each one, the maturity of laws, you can get whipside trying to react to what now in CPRA are 20 new regulations.
And I don't want to go through all of the laws here. That's not the point. You can go to the next slide, Brad. But the point here is that there are some fundamental things that most of these laws have. And you probably have seen these before, but as a great basic refresher, as a consumer, you have a right to know what data a business has collected about you. You now have a right to delete it and ask that it be corrected. Corrected is a new feature that came in CPRA, but it's now built into California law, expected to be adopted elsewhere. You have a right to a portable format to get that data in a way that you can share it and use it. You have a right to opt out of your data being sold. And you have the right in California to seek damages. Not all states give you number 5, but many do. And of course, you have the right to equal service. So you cannot differentiate people and offer different pricing based upon who they are. Next slide, Brad. So as a consumer, you've got a bunch of rights. And as a business, you've got to provide consumers that access. You've got to honor that deletion and modification request. You've got to have appropriate notices and consent to get consumers to consent to how to use their data. You've got to properly make sure you're sharing it with third parties. The new notice obligations, so the 3 on the bottom are new in CPRA. They've strengthened the notice obligations that you've got to give as a business. There's actually an interesting change here on data minimization. The law now is going to require you to only keep the data that you need for the useful purpose or life of that data. So the useful life could be legally bound, or it could be, hey, the guy's warranty is up and I can now no longer keep data about him. So there's data minimization requirements, legally binding. And you've got to demonstrate compliance to the law now as well through audits and responses. So some strengthening there. The big news in CPRA, though, really, is that California is funding an enforcement agency starting in July 1st of this year that will have a $10 million budget to go after people who are not abiding by the law. It's very similar to what Europe does. We'll see how other states adopt this, but that enforcement arm starts giving this some teeth. Next, Brad. So we've talked a little bit about the, the law here, and I'm not going to spend much more on that. Certainly, if you have questions, we'd be more than happy to answer that in the subsequent sessions. But Brad, why don't we talk a little bit about the commercial landscape here, and why don't we kick it off with a bit of a video of what industry is saying.
Hold, please, and you're on, Steve.
This is Tim Cook from Apple.
The truth is, we could make a ton of money if we monetized our customer. If our customer was our product, we could make a ton of money. We've elected not to do that. We don't. Our products are iPhones and iPads and Macs and HomePods and the watch, etc. And if we can convince you to buy one, we'll make a little bit of money, right? But you are not our product. You are our customer. You are a jewel, and we care. We care about the user experience, and we're not going to traffic in your personal life. I think it's an invasion of privacy. I think it's privacy to us is a human right. It's a civil liberty and something that is unique to America. You know, this is like freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and privacy is right up there for us. And so we've always done this. This is not something that we just started last week when we saw something happening. We've been doing this for years.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC.
Brad, I'll let you have the con again here. I wanted to highlight that because, why did Apple do this? Yes, they've been saying this for a while. And by the way, it's not just Apple. Other companies, Microsoft and so on, are taking similar stances. But they did it because consumers are starting to rebel, and companies are seeing that and starting to figure out how can we make this work for consumers. Brad, you may want to go in full screen there. And why don't you take it from here, Brad, and talk about the consumer's attitude towards the privacy.
Great. I've got it at full screen. Is it not showing full screen?
I'm seeing it as notes.
Okay, hang on. Sharing. This time with feeling.
Okay. There we go. Just go full screen there if you would, please. Right. Thank you. There we go. Perfect.
All right. So, boy, there are a lot of statistics. I'm just going to highlight a couple. Consumers are getting it. The data trade is dead. They are starting to realize that the risks outweigh the benefits, and they realize that because 220 million Americans out of Equifax were breached. These breaches are crazy, and so they started to churn out. 48% have actually stopped buying. 39% would walk away. 53% would want their information back. And so it's a matter of trust. And at the end of the day, that's what consumers are starting to say is, if I don't trust you with my information, I can't do business with you. This is very much the case in Europe. It's coming to a theater near you here in California. So we're in our early days here in the United States because we are, by our culture, kind of a weird trusting culture a little bit. But that backlash is happening in real time. What are businesses doing? Well, most companies get it. like Tim Cook, they're actively working with privacy laws. And yet, if you were to ask the IT professionals within those organizations, most of them don't even have an incident response plan, according to IBM. They have about 500,000 files of sensitive data, but ugly underbelly here, 53% of the companies say that about 1,000 of those files are open to every employee. Remember, we talked about protection? Well, protection is about access, controlled access to the data. That sounds like maybe it's an overshare. Almost 50% of Americans have had their information breached. And now I think if we walked it back 10 years ago, this was an isolated case, right? Very few people were getting offers for Equifax tracking and all the like. Now they get, I get it. I think I get one every quarter. I can't even track how often my data has been breached. And when that happens, by the way, the average breach is about $4 million. So a lot of smoke to organizations trying to respond at the same time, not just to the security and the ransomware we discussed, but also now trying to get their arms around privacy and the compliance laws. We spared you the fines in compliance, but there are green shoots, and most of those have to do with the return on investment. And fascinating, 40% of companies, primarily in Europe, and this is all Cisco information, saw 2 times return or more from their privacy spend. In other words, they could stop the churn if they did the right thing and communicated with their customers. So businesses are prioritizing security and privacy, and this is catching up. And there are emerging businesses that do this. So let's kind of put our toe into one. Obviously, we have existing trades already. I mentioned my Gmail, and I don't bemoan it. I use my Gmail account still. My Gmail account's worth to Google. My user is about 5,000 a year, an astonishing amount. If you take the top line and divide it by users, it's extraordinary. But even car insurance trackers, which we see on our droning on in our television, are worth about $100 to $300 a year. You want to get tracked? I certainly don't. I drive too fast. I don't want to let them know. But even the people that get tracked are going to start affecting my rates. So we're all affected. You get this, right? This is the existing trade. Oh, and by the way, remember we talked about psychographics and personification and these lifestyles and all these things? Check out some of the, now this is what is your data worth in the marketplace. Unmarried mother with 3 kids, about $1,000. Unmarried doctor, no kids, I assume, $5,000. A married plumber, $2,500. So you go through this, and it varies, of course, by domicile. But that's pretty interesting stuff. And guess what? There are companies who are now getting into the data trade, and here's one, Operia, and they have they started with blockchain, which most of you are familiar with. Using Ethereum, they've created personal data tokens with tremendous benefit. I now, as a consumer, can choose what data to share and to whom, essentially selling that because I now get real money. I'm creating a secure sales platform. It's only available to those who I ask to opt in. And of course, it's in the blockchain, so I get consumer control. By the way, it's my data, so I'm validating it. So the buyer actually gets a higher quality of data. You can imagine all the crappy data out there that's resold, and you have to basically buy 2 or 3 pieces of data and make sure that Brad's phone number is the right one. It removes the middleman. There's an entire business, $77 billion in the ad tech business, and probably a third of that is going to middlemen who are brokering your data. So now we get transparency, and guess what? The consumer gets up to $100 to $5,000 a year. So emerging businesses in privacy specific to data. But it didn't stop there. There's a lot of interesting discussion about getting rid of cookies. And this is just one example. There are many, particularly to the browser. As I mentioned, there's a $77 billion business projected by eMarketer in the ad tech space. And today we all know that cookies track individual browser histories down to the IP address. That's why we get retargeting ads. We allow third parties to put pixel images and embed codes. It's pretty much the wild, wild west. Well, the clawback is coming. Google is talking about a new browser that incorporates this federated learning of cohorts. What is Flock? It's this idea of creating anonymized groups similar to psychographic groups, but those psychographic groups are actually based on your browsing history, which is centrally maintained by an AI engine and identifies you in groups, and it does it every single week. So say this week I start looking and start acting like a refinance shopper. It knows that, and it couples me with a bunch of refinance shoppers, and it just puts me in that group, and it says, okay, you can buy Brad and another 16,550 people who look and feel like Brad who are refinancing. It'll recalc me. I might change my behavior next week, but for now, I can now target to you ads. And by the way, in that, every person has a unique anonymized ID, so that the advertiser actually can do this. Here's the problem, though. There's a lot of problems, but this is just what's evolving. This is not an opt-in consumer control. If you use a Google browser, the Google browser, you can't opt out. This is what comes with it. This is how they maintain their stream. They're not going to walk away from whatever percent of $77 billion drives their business. But the other thing is that it's an unsupervised algorithm. It's AI, which means, and that's kind of good and bad, right? Whatever numbers of groups, and there may be hundreds, probably thousands of these cohort groups, are going to be largely synthesized. So you can imagine we've got monarchy control, Google, and defining it, sensitivity in our cohorts. I might not want you to know that I'm looking at erectile dysfunction solutions. And I've got an opt-out control, one of about 10 problems, but it's coming. We're trying to solve this cookieless browser. And ironically, isn't it odd? We can turn off cookies right now, but do we? We don't. So these are kind of some emerging markets, emerging technologies, and now how about emerging methodologies? Kind of the last foothold here. And this is, I know this is an eye chart late in our presentation. I apologize. This idea of building privacy into software, into hardware, into anything, from the get-go. It's proactive. And what they've done is they've taken these 7 founding principles: being proactive, put privacy in as a default assumption in all the things you're doing as an entity, embed it in the design, make it positive sum. It doesn't have to come at the expense of functionality. Make sure the data is protected from collection to death, end to end, make it transparent and managed and user-centric. All of these things sort of embrace these fair information practices, and they're right there for you to see: consent, accountability, etc. And they're the guts of what Steve and I spend our days doing with our clients, which is how do we navigate the trade-offs and optimize the experience for consumers, not just to comply, but also to elevate, as Tim Cook, I think, does a pretty good job of talking about the customer experience, embracing the customer, and kind of putting ourselves and living a day in their shoes, and maybe for a lifetime. It's their data, it's our data, we should treat it as our own. And to that end, when we started the business, and Steve, I'll let you opine on emerging approaches, tell them about our own framework.
Well, this is an interesting one. It evolved when Brad and I started to research getting into the data privacy business a couple of years back. We found that the business is very fragmented. In fact, data privacy is kind of where cybersecurity was 7 or 8 years ago, right? Nobody really kind of knows what it is. It's a hot potato that gets passed around. So somebody sees it and an attorney brings it up and say, oh, it's a legal issue, right? And they say, no, it's not. It's a CISO issue. Oh, no, it's a CIO issue. Oh, no, it's a marketing issue, right? And so everybody gets a piece of this thing and nobody really comes together. And when you look at privacy overall, very much like cybersecurity, you've got to look at it holistically across your business, right? You've got to look at, number one, how do you deal with your consumers, right? And let's face it, we're all consumers, right? So we care about this. How do you respond to them when they have concerns? How do you respond to, number two, going around the wheel here, the dark blue area, the law, right? And how do you manage the risk of being fined or sued or whatever? Thirdly, around it at Orange Circles, how do you manage third parties? All the people you share data with, right? Look, Facebook shared data with Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica is the one that got into trouble, but who got egg on their face? Facebook, right? And Facebook lost subscribers as a result of that scandal. You go down to Pii Management, and this is really the foundation in that pink box about what does this mean? It means you have to know where your data assets are, where your inventory, your fields are, what you're using all the data for, how long are you retaining it, who are you sharing it with, right? So getting an inventory of your data and your whole data management landscape is extremely important. I know I've been in the IT world for over 35 years, and I remember running data management years ago, and it was difficult back then, and I still don't think we have a good handle on our data. But this is now forcing the hand. Data protection really is, we talked about that, it's the cybersecurity elements. The privacy piece of it is, how are you using the data? Are you using it for the right purposes as opposed to just getting into the kingdom? But nevertheless, data protection is an essential piece of this thing. Cybersecurity is a very close partner. That light blue box is about leadership and control, because all of the departments that are affected by all the circles I just went around need to be coordinated. You need to be working off a consistent policy, consistent procedures and frameworks, and it needs to be organized very much like a PMO would organize a program. And lastly, you've got a communications piece, because you need to communicate the importance of this internally to your business, to your employees, but also, as Tim Cook did, communicate your posture to your customers, because customers care and they're making decisions with their feet. We can see that starting to happen. Consumers are aware, they're raising it to their politicians, which is why we're seeing laws. They're raising it to the companies that they're doing business with and making choices about where they do business. And if you have a positive posture around privacy and give that confidence, you'll be in good shape. And we basically pull all of that together. And in short, really, privacy is good business, to be honest, right? We've seen that in Europe. Some studies in Europe have shown that companies that take a good posture on privacy is seen as much as an 11% increase in top line sales. That's huge. We're behind the game a little bit here, working on it, but that's kind of what we're all about. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. We've taken you from why privacy is important to you through how it's being used, how it's being abused, the goods and bads of the technologies that are evolving, a little bit on the law, and hopefully tried to put it together into what it all means. So I certainly hope everybody found this this talk helpful, and thank you for your time, and open to questions here and also in the after session. So with that, Brad, anything to add?
No, just don't be offended that your Social Security is now only worth $2.
All right. Thank you so much, Brad and Steve. Very informative and kind of scary stuff. I think from my point of view, as as somebody who's training future software developers, the whole privacy by design thing is really the major point of focus for me, because that's something that we can sort of work on right now at the universities to train our future software developers to actually take it seriously and design that stuff into it. But before I get to the questions from the general group, there's the first question that we always ask, and we do this via a poll. And the poll gets to how many of the attendees here tonight are IEEE members. One of our co-sponsors is the IEEE Computer Society. And so we like to know how many people came to us through the IEEE. We also are co-sponsored by the Los Angeles chapter of the ACM. So if you're a member of the Los Angeles ACM chapter, please check that box. And also we'd like to know if any of our student ACM chapters are participating tonight. So that's question number one. You should have seen a poll pop up on your screen, and hopefully you've answered that. There is one question right now in the Q&A. I would like it if we just deal with this question right now in the webinar, and now we're going to move to a Zoom meeting right after this, in which you can share your cameras and microphones and ask questions directly. But the one question which came from Windsor Brown, will the new California law, the California Enforcement Organization, go after Google for us?
Don't we wish? Who knows what they're going to do? You know, there's a lot of guesses about that, and I'd just be guessing, honestly. Look, I think they're going to try to find a couple of the big guys, and they're going to find them so that they can make some headlines. We've seen that happen in Europe, right? Facebook got a $5 billion fine as a result of the Cambridge Analytica thing. Of course, 5 billion is what, 1/4's worth of revenue for these guys, so it's no big deal. In fact, I know after they got the fine, their stock price still went up, right? So it was a slap on the wrist. Time will tell. I know there'll be enforcement. I don't know yet after who, but I wouldn't be surprised if the big guys are part of it.
And keep in mind that Alistair McTaggart, who started the CCPA law to begin with, co-opted some of the big five social media giants. He didn't do it in a vacuum. He did. So they have a part in this. They have a lot of money behind them, and the lobbying is not insignificant. So yeah, I'd be surprised if they went after a Google. I wouldn't be surprised if they went at a lesser social media company.
Right.
Okay, so I have posted a link to the Zoom meeting in the chat. If you go grab that URL, I will ask one more question because it's been posted here in the Q&A. That is, do you see privacy by design or privacy of data turned into a formal standard? We're interested in something like an IEEE standard at some point.
I think that's a fair. I think that's a fair assumption. I think the problem is that privacy by design, the 7 founding principles, are still a little bit fluffy. And if you look at sort of ISO and some of the other frameworks that are now solidifying, NIST, for example, on privacy, those elements drive, I think, a little bit more how privacy by design will work. So yes, I think it will survive. I think it will become the de facto requirement for almost every organization, but I think it'll morph. I think it'll morph in response. Your thoughts, Steve?
No, I think you're absolutely right. We've got the principles framework, and that's about it. We need more. Totally agree. And I think it's absolutely critical. I think it'll evolve.
All right.
We're just starting to see that, actually. Even NIST has just started to put out a privacy framework that's starting to get traction. And I think we're going to see it on in other facets as well, but it's in its infancy.
So at this point, we'd like to transition over to the Zoom meeting. Then you can all unmute yourselves and share your cameras, and we can have a wonderful free-form discussion with Brad and Steve. I'm sure there's a lot of issues that we would love to explore. So
we'll see you in a minute. And for those of you who are not going to that meeting, thank you. It's been a privilege presenting tonight. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you.
All right. See you all soon over in the meeting.